The snow fell in thick, silent sheets across the mountain valley, muffling even the sound of Luna's paws as she moved through the forest. She had been alone for 3 moons now, ever since the sickness took her pack. First it was old Granite, the beta male who had taught her to hunt elk when she was barely more than a pup herself. Then her sister, Willow, whose playful spirit had kept them all young even as the seasons turned. One by one they fell, until even her mate, Storm, lay still beneath the ancient pine where they had first met. Luna had stayed with him until his body grew cold, her mournful howls echoing across the empty valley, unanswered. Now she was the last, a gray shadow moving through a world that had become too large and too quiet. At 7 years old, she was still strong enough to hunt, though taking down anything larger than a rabbit alone was nearly impossible. She had learned to follow the ravens, those clever blackbirds who knew where the carcasses lay, where a lone wolf might scavenge what the bears and cougars had left behind. It was no way for a wolf to live, but it was living, and some deep instinct kept her moving forward, even when her heart told her to simply lie down in the snow and join her family. The scent hit her nostrils like a physical blow, stopping her mid-stride. Mountain lion. Fresh. Very fresh. Her lips pulled back instinctively, revealing teeth that had torn through hide and sinew for years. The hatred was immediate and primal, coded into her very bones by thousands of generations of conflict. It was a puma that had taken her first litter 5 years ago. She could still see it clearly in her mind, the tawny forms slipping into their den while she and Storm were hunting, the devastating emptiness they found upon return, the small bodies scattered like broken toys. Only one pup had survived, hidden beneath his siblings, and he too had died the following winter, too traumatized to thrive. She should turn back. A lone wolf was no match for a healthy cougar, and the scent was strong enough to suggest the cat was very close. But there was something else in the air, something that made her pause. Blood, a lot of it, and another scent, stranger still, that made her ears prick forward in confusion. The unmistakable smell of milk, of nursing, but mixed with death. Moving carefully now, placing each paw with deliberate silence, Luna crept forward through the underbrush. The wind was in her favor, carrying her scent away from whatever lay ahead. Through the snow-laden branches, she saw it. A massive female cougar, easily 200 pounds, lay motionless in the small clearing. Her tawny coat was stained crimson from numerous wounds, claw marks that could only have come from another cat. A territorial dispute, Luna realized. The female had lost. But that wasn't what made Luna's breath catch in her throat. Pressed against the dead cat's belly, mewling with a sound that was part cry and part desperate suckling attempt, was a cub. Tiny, probably no more than 2 months old, his spotted coat still fuzzy with youth. His eyes were open, blue-gray and unfocused with grief and hunger, and he was kneading his small paws against his mother's cold flesh, trying to nurse from a body that would never provide warmth or sustenance again. Every instinct in Luna's body screamed at her to kill it. This was her chance. A helpless enemy, the offspring of her species' greatest rival, completely vulnerable. One quick bite, and there would be one less cougar to compete with, one less future threat to any wolf pups she might never have. The logic was crystal clear, written in the ancient laws of survival that governed the wilderness. She stepped into the clearing, and the cub's head snapped up. Those blue-gray eyes met her yellow ones, and for a moment, neither moved. The cub was too young to fully understand what she was, too young to have learned to fear the scent of wolf. But he understood predator, understood danger, and his tiny body pressed harder against his mother's corpse, a pitiful whimper escaping his throat. Luna took another step forward, her jaws parting slightly. It would be so easy, so quick. The cub closed his eyes, his whole body trembling, but he didn't run. He couldn't. He had nowhere to go, no one to run to. His mother was everything, and his mother was gone. The whimper turned into a wail, high and keening, a sound of such pure loss that it seemed to pierce through the falling snow and echo off the mountains themselves. That sound. Luna's body went rigid. She knew that sound. She had made that sound, standing over Storm's body, over Willow's, over her own pups. It was the sound of a heart breaking, of a world ending, of loneliness so complete it threatened to swallow you whole. The cub wasn't crying for milk, wasn't crying from fear. He was crying for his mother, for the warm presence that had been his entire universe and was now just cooling meat. Luna's jaws closed. She took a step back, then another. But she couldn't leave. The cub's cries were weakening now, his small body shuddering with exhaustion and cold. He had been here for hours, maybe longer. The snow was building up on his mother's body, on his own small form. He would be dead by morning, frozen or starved, if another predator didn't find him first. She thought of her own pup, the one who had survived the cougar attack only to waste away over the winter. How he had cried in his sleep, how he had searched constantly for his siblings, how he had never learned to play properly because there was no one to play with. She thought of how desperately she had tried to comfort him, to be enough, to fill the void left by his murdered littermates. She had failed then. Her love hadn't been enough to save him from his trauma. The cub's eyes opened again, finding hers. There was no hope in them, no expectation, just a hollow acceptance that seemed wrong in something so young. Luna found herself moving forward again, but differently this time. Her head was low, but not in a hunting crouch. Her ears were forward, alert but not aggressive. The cub watched her approach with dull curiosity, too exhausted and heartbroken to even fear properly anymore. When she was close enough to touch him, Luna did something that went against every fiber of her being. She lay down, not next to the dead cougar, but a few feet away, her body curved in a half-circle. The universal position of a mother making space for her young. The cub blinked, confusion flickering across his small features. Luna made a soft sound in her throat, not quite a whine, not quite a growl, just a sound, an invitation. The cub didn't move for a long time. He pressed against his mother again, nuzzling her cold fur, seeking comfort that would never come. But eventually, as the snow continued to fall and the last of his strength began to fade, some deep instinct toward survival made him lift his head. Luna remained perfectly still, barely breathing. The cub took one shaky step away from his mother's body, then another. His legs wobbled, weak from hunger and cold. When he reached Luna, he stopped, swaying on his feet. She could smell his fear now, sharp and acrid, as his inherited instincts finally recognized her for what she was. Enemy, danger, death. But stronger than the fear was the cold and the hunger and the desperate need for warmth, for contact, for something alive in a world that had become nothing but death. With a small cry, he collapsed against her belly. Luna's entire body went rigid. The wrongness of it was overwhelming. The scent of cougar filled her nostrils, triggering every aggressive instinct she possessed. This creature pressed against her was not pack, not kin, not even the same species. He was everything she had been taught to hate, to fear, to kill. But he was also warm and small and shaking with exhaustion. And when he pressed his face in her fur, seeking comfort, something inside her chest cracked open. Slowly, carefully, she curved her body around him. Her thick winter coat enveloped his small form, and she felt him burrow deeper into her warmth, his shaking gradually beginning to subside. She could feel his heartbeat, rapid and frightened, against her skin, could feel his tiny paws kneading against her belly, an instinct from nursing that he couldn't suppress. She had no milk to give him, hadn't nursed pups in years, but she had warmth, and for now, that was enough. The snow continued to fall as darkness crept across the valley. Luna stayed perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break whatever insane spell had fallen over both of them. The cub's breathing gradually deepened, exhaustion finally overtaking fear, and he slept. Luna lifted her head to look at him. This small spotted enemy curled trustingly against her belly. What was she doing? What could possibly come of this except disaster? In the morning, she would have to make a decision. She couldn't raise a cougar cub. It was impossible, insane. They were solitary creatures by nature, and he would grow to be her natural enemy. If her pack could see her now, They would be horrified. Storm would never understand. And yet, as she looked down at the sleeping cub, she couldn't imagine leaving him. He had lost everything, just as she had. They were both alone in a world that suddenly seemed too large and too cruel for solitary survival. The first challenge came with dawn. The cub woke hungry, and Luna had nothing to give him. He was old enough to eat meat, she thought, but young enough to still need it partially digested. She watched him nose around her belly, searching for nipples that would provide milk, and felt a pang of inadequacy. But hunger was a powerful motivator, and she knew where a deer carcass lay, only half a mile away. She had been saving it, rationing it to last through the week, but the cub needed food now. Standing was difficult. The cub immediately cried out, reaching for her with his small paws, terrified of being abandoned again. Luna looked back at him, then at the forest, torn. She couldn't carry him like a wolf pup. He was too large, and his body was the wrong shape for her jaws to grip safely. But leaving him seemed equally impossible. Finally, she took a few steps toward the forest, then looked back, making a soft chuffing sound she had once used to call her own pups. To her amazement, he followed. On unsteady legs, crying with fear and effort, but he followed. Every few yards, Luna had to stop and wait for him to catch up, his small form struggling through the snow that came up to his belly. What should have been a 10-minute journey took nearly an hour, but finally, they reached the carcass. Luna immediately set to work, tearing off the softest pieces of meat she could find. The cub watched with fascination as she chewed the meat, breaking it down into smaller pieces. In a normal pack, she would have regurgitated this for young pups, but she had no pups, hadn't triggered those maternal hormones. Instead, she dropped the thoroughly chewed pieces in front of the cub. He sniffed them suspiciously at first, but hunger won. He gobbled the meat down, and Luna found herself chewing more and more until the small belly was distended with food. He looked healthier already, she thought, though that might have been wishful thinking. When he was finished eating, he curled up right there in the snow, too exhausted to go any further. Luna lay down beside him, her body forming a protective barrier against the wind. As she watched him sleep, she tried to think practically about what she was doing. He would grow quickly. In 6 months, he would be nearly her size. In a year, he would be larger. Cougars were solitary hunters, ambush predators who relied on stealth and power rather than the pack coordination that wolves employed. Their entire social structure, their hunting methods, their territorial needs, everything was different. But as she watched him sleep, his small paws twitching with dreams, she couldn't focus on the problems. All she could see was an orphaned young one who needed her. The species didn't matter. The impossibility didn't matter. What mattered was that she was no longer alone, and neither was he. The first few weeks were harder than Luna could have imagined. The cub, whom she found herself thinking of simply as little one, was nothing like a wolf pup. He didn't howl. He screamed, a sound that set every nerve in Luna's body on edge. He didn't play like a wolf pup either. Where her own young had tumbled and wrestled in groups, learning pack dynamics, little one pounced and stalked, practicing the solitary ambush techniques that were written into his DNA. Teaching him to hunt was a disaster at first. Luna tried to show him how to chase, how to run down prey as wolves did, working it to exhaustion. But his body wasn't built for endurance. He was made for short, explosive bursts of power. His instincts told him to climb, to leap from above, to grab with claws she didn't possess. She watched him try to climb trees, his claws finding purchase where her paws never could, and realized she couldn't teach him to be a wolf. She had to let him be a cougar, just a cougar with a wolf for a mother. So she adapted. When she hunted, she would wound prey and let him practice his killing bite. She learned to drive deer toward areas with low-hanging branches where he could leap from above. It was inefficient, nothing like the coordinated pack hunt she had grown up with, but it worked. They both ate, and little one grew stronger every day. The real test came when they encountered other predators. The first was a young male wolf, a disperser from another pack looking for territory. Luna smelled him long before he appeared, and every instinct told her to call out, to howl, to announce herself as a potential ally or mate. But little one was pressed against her side, and she knew what would happen if the stranger saw him. When the male wolf finally appeared through the trees, his reaction was immediate and violent. His lips pulled back, showing every tooth, and a snarl ripped from his throat that made little one shrink against Luna's legs. The male's yellow eyes darted between Luna and the cub, confusion and disgust warring on his features. "What abomination is this?" his body language screamed. "What madness has taken you?" Luna stepped forward, placing herself between the male and little one. Her own lips pulled back, but not in greeting. This was a threat display, a clear warning. The male circled them, his movements agitated, aggressive. He barked, sharp and demanding, calling for her to abandon the unnatural thing at her side, to remember what she was. For a moment, Luna wavered. This wolf was young and strong. He could hunt. He could be the beginning of a new pack, a chance to return to her old life. All she had to do was step aside, let nature take its course. Little one must have sensed her hesitation because he made a small sound, not quite a mule, not quite a whine, and pressed harder against her legs. That small sound decided her. Luna lunged at the male wolf, not to kill but to drive off. Her teeth found his shoulder, drawing blood, and her snarl was deeper and more threatening than anything she had produced in years. The male yelped, confused and hurt by her rejection. He tried once more to circle around her, to get to the cub, but Luna was relentless. She drove him back, again and again, until finally he fled into the forest, looking back only once with eyes full of bewilderment and something like pity. Luna stood there, panting, blood on her muzzle that wasn't hers, and felt the last connection to her old life sever. She was no longer just a wolf. She was something else now, something unprecedented. Little one rubbed against her legs, purring, a sound that wolves couldn't make, but that she was learning to interpret as contentment, as gratitude, as love. The encounter with her own kind had been difficult, but it was nothing compared to meeting another cougar. It happened when little one was 4 months old, his spots beginning to fade, his body lengthening into the sleek form of a young predator. They were following a game trail when Luna scented her, another female, and this one with cubs of her own. Luna's first instinct was to run. A mother cougar would be viciously protective, and Luna had no desire to fight. But little one hadn't developed the same wariness. When a female cougar appeared on a rocky outcrop above them, her 2 cubs beside her, little one actually chirped in greeting, a sound he hadn't made since those first days after his mother's death. The female's reaction was immediate and hostile. She screamed, a sound that echoed off the canyon walls, and her cubs immediately retreated behind her. But her eyes weren't on Luna, the obvious threat. They were fixed on little one with an expression of pure revulsion. Here was one of her kind, but wrong, corrupted, tainted by the scent of wolf that clung to him like a second skin. Little one, confused by the rejection, took a step toward the other cubs. The female launched herself from the rock, landing between little one and her offspring with a force that shook the ground. Her paw lashed out, catching little one across the face, sending him tumbling. Luna saw red. The fight was vicious and brief. Luna had the advantage of surprise. The cougar had expected little one to be alone, hadn't counted on a wolf mother defending a cougar cub. They rolled in the dirt, teeth and claws finding purchase, blood flowing from both combatants. Luna's pack fighting style was ineffective against the cougar's powerful claws, but her endurance was greater, her determination absolute. The female cougar retreated first, calling her cubs to follow. But not before she looked at little one with those cold, dismissive eyes and hissed something in the language of her kind that needed no translation. Abomination. Unnatural. Not one of us. Little one stood frozen, blood dripping from the scratches on his face, watching the only other cougars he had seen since his mother's death disappear into the forest. Luna limped to his side, her own wounds throbbing, and gently licked the blood from his face. He turned in her touch, burying his face in her neck ruff, and she felt him tremble. That night, curled together in a cave they had claimed as their den, Luna realized the full weight of what she had done. She hadn't just saved little one. She had condemned him. He would never be accepted by Cougars, would never find a mate among his own kind. He smelled too much like Wolf now, moved too much like her, had learned too many wrong behaviors. And she had made herself an outcast as well, a wolf who chose a cougar over her own kind. But when little one pressed against her in his sleep, purring that strange, comforting sound, she couldn't regret it. They had each other. In this vast, hostile wilderness, they had carved out their own small territory where the laws of nature bent to accommodate their impossible bond. As little one grew, their hunting dynamic evolved into something unique. He would climb into the trees, using his superior vision to spot prey from above. Then he would signal Luna with a specific call they had developed, neither wolf nor cougar, but something in between. Luna would circle around, using her endurance to drive the prey toward little one's ambush point. It was devastatingly effective, combining the best of both their species' hunting strategies. They took down an elk this way when little one was 6 months old, his first large kill. Luna watched with pride as he delivered the killing bite, his technique perfect despite having no cougar to teach him. They fed together, side by side, and Luna found herself grooming his face afterward, removing the blood with careful licks while he purred. But success brought new challenges. Their unusual hunting partnership allowed them to take down larger prey than either could manage alone, which meant they needed less territory to survive. But it also meant they were more visible, more noticeable to the other predators in the area. Wolves and cougars both began to recognize their scent markers, the strange mixture that belonged to neither species fully. A pack of wolves moved into the eastern valley, and Luna could hear them howling at night, could smell them marking the borders of their territory. Part of her ached to answer their calls, to join the complex social chorus she had grown up with. But she knew what their response would be if they saw her with little one. She had made her choice, and there was no going back. Little one seemed to sense her melancholy during those nights. He couldn't howl, but he would press against her and make soft, chuffing sounds, his version of comfort. Sometimes he would bring her small gifts, a rabbit he had caught on his own, a particularly smooth river stone, once even a cluster of wild flowers gripped carefully in his jaws. These gestures, so unlike anything a wolf would do, but clearly meant to show affection, never failed to lift her spirits. The changing seasons brought new challenges. Summer meant more prey, but also more competition. They encountered a bear at their cached elk carcass, and for the first time, Luna saw little one's full potential as a fighter. At 8 months old, he was nearly her size, all lean muscle and barely contained power. While Luna distracted the bear with feints and quick bites, little one climbed a nearby tree and launched himself onto the bear's back, his claws finding purchase in the thick fur. The bear, more surprised than hurt, decided the meal wasn't worth the trouble and lumbered off. Luna and little one stood panting, victorious, and Luna felt a surge of pride so strong it made her chest ache. This strange, spotted cub she had saved had become a formidable young predator, capable and strong. But more than that, he had become her family. As autumn approached, bringing with it the mating season for both wolves and cougars, new tensions arose. Luna could smell the changes in little one, now nearly a year old. His body was producing hormones that called for him to establish territory, to seek a mate, to follow the biological imperatives of his species. She watched him become restless, scent marking more frequently, his eyes scanning the horizon with a new intensity. One morning, she woke to find him gone. His scent trail led south, toward the mountains where she knew other cougars lived. Luna's heart raced with panic. She followed his trail for miles, her aging joints protesting the pace, until she found him at the edge of a cliff, looking out over a vast valley she had never explored. He turned when he heard her approach, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. The wild was calling to him, the ancient voice of his species telling him to roam, to claim, to find his own kind. But when Luna made a soft whine, a sound she hadn't made since her own pups were young, he came to her. He rubbed his head against hers, purring. and together they walked back to their territory. But Luna knew this was only a reprieve. Little one was growing up, becoming what he was meant to be, and she couldn't keep him forever. The thought of losing him, of being alone again, was almost unbearable. But worse was the thought of him being rejected again, of facing the world without understanding why he didn't quite fit anywhere. Winter came early that year, heavy snows blanketing the forest and making hunting difficult. Luna's age was beginning to show more clearly now. She was 8 years old, elderly for a wolf in the wild. Her joints ached in the cold, and her stamina wasn't what it used to be. But Little One was in his prime, strong and capable, and he began taking the lead in their hunts. It was during one of these hunts that everything changed. They were tracking a deer through deep snow when they heard it, a sound that made both of them freeze. A cougar scream, but not just any cougar. This was a young female, and her call was not aggressive but inviting. Little One's head snapped toward the sound, his entire body going rigid with attention. Luna's heart sank. She knew this moment would come, had been dreading it for months. Little One looked at her, then toward the sound, then back at her. The conflict in his eyes was painful to see. Luna made the hardest decision of her life. She walked forward, past Little One, toward the sound. He followed, confused but trusting. They found her in a moonlit clearing, a young female cougar, probably only 2 years old. She was beautiful, her coat pristine, her movements graceful. When she saw them, her reaction was immediate. She hissed at Luna, back arching, but her eyes kept returning to Little One with obvious interest. What followed was one of the strangest courtships in the natural world. The female, whom Luna came to think of as shadow for her dark markings, was clearly attracted to Little One, but repulsed by Luna's presence. She would approach Little One, making soft chirping sounds, then retreat when she caught Luna's scent on him. Little One was caught in an impossible position. His instincts drove him toward Shadow, but his loyalty to Luna held him back. He would take a few steps toward the female, then return to Luna's side, pressing against her as if seeking permission or reassurance. For 3 days, this dance continued. Shadow growing bolder, Little One growing more conflicted, and Luna watching it all with a breaking heart. On the 3rd night, Luna made another impossible choice. While Little One slept, she quietly left their den and found Shadow. The young female immediately went on the defensive, but Luna did something unprecedented. She lay down, exposing her belly, the universal sign of submission. Shadow was so shocked she actually stopped hissing. Luna then did something even more extraordinary. She began to groom Shadow, the way she groomed Little One, gentle licks that were more about acceptance than dominance. Shadow sat frozen, every muscle tense, ready to fight or flee. But as Luna continued her gentle ministrations, something in the young cougar relaxed. Perhaps she was an orphan too, or simply young enough to not fully understand how wrong this all was. When Little One found them the next morning, Luna grooming Shadow while the young female dozed, his expression was one of complete bewilderment. What developed over the following weeks defied every law of nature. Shadow began following them, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. She learned their hunting techniques, adding her own refinements. She was a better climber than Little One, more patient in the ambush, and their success rate improved dramatically. Luna taught her things no cougar should know: how to read the pack signs of wolves, how to cache meat properly for long-term storage, how to predict weather changes by the behavior of birds. Shadow absorbed it all with the quick intelligence of youth, though she never lost her wariness around Luna entirely. The strangest moments were the quiet ones. When the 3 of them would rest after a successful hunt, Shadow and Little One pressed together in the way of mates, but Little One's head resting on Luna's paws. When Shadow began purring, Little One would join her, and Luna would add her own soft rumble. Not quite a purr, but the closest a wolf could manage. But Luna could feel time catching up with her. 9 years old now, ancient for a wild wolf, her body was failing. Hunts that once exhilarated her now exhausted her. Her teeth, worn from years of use, struggled with tough hide. Her left hind leg, injured in that long-ago fight with the female cougar, had developed a permanent limp. Spring brought new life to the forest and a new development in their strange family. Shadow was pregnant. Luna could smell it on her, could see it in the way she moved more carefully, ate more deliberately. Little one was going to be a father, and Luna was going to be what? There was no word for what she would be to these cubs. Shadow denayed in a cave high up the mountainside, a place Luna could no longer reach with her failing joints. Little one divided his time between the two females, bringing food to Shadow while still hunting with Luna. But Luna could see where his priority lay, as it should. Shadow and the coming cubs were his future. Luna was his past. The cubs were born on a night when the moon was dark, and Luna could hear Shadow's labor cries echoing off the mountains. Little one paced anxiously at the base of the cliff, wanting to be with his mate, but also unwilling to leave Luna alone. Luna made the decision for him, nudging him toward the climbing path with her nose. He looked back at her once, his eyes full of uncertainty, but she lay down and closed her eyes, feigning sleep. She listened to his claws scraping on rock as he climbed to his new family. There were 2 cubs, Luna learned when Little One brought them down to meet her a month later. 1 male, 1 female, both with the spotted coats of youth, but something different in their features, something that spoke of their unusual heritage. They had their father's broader head, his slightly longer legs, and when they moved, it was with a coordination that seemed almost wolf-like. Shadow watched nervously as Luna sniffed the cubs, but she didn't intervene. The female cub, bolder than her brother, actually pounced on Luna's tail, batting at it with her tiny paws. Luna's heart melted. She groomed both cubs while they squeaked and protested, and by the time she was done, they smelled of wolf as much as cougar. That summer was perhaps the strangest and most beautiful of Luna's life. She helped raise cougar cubs, teaching them things their mother couldn't. She showed them how to read the wind, how to understand the language of ravens, how to work together instead of alone. The little female, whom Luna thought of as brave, was especially apt, often choosing to sleep pressed against Luna's belly rather than with her mother. But by autumn, Luna knew her time was running short. Her body was shutting down, system by system. Hunting was impossible now. She relied entirely on Little One and Shadow to bring her food. Some days, even eating was difficult. The cubs, now 6 months old and learning to hunt, would bring her mice and voles, proud of their small contributions. The first snow of winter found Luna unable to rise from her resting place. Little One lay beside her, his body pressed along her entire length, sharing his warmth. Shadow brought the cubs, and they all lay together, an impossible family united by love that transcended species. Luna's breathing was labored, each inhale a monumental effort. But she wasn't afraid. She had lived longer than most wolves, had experienced something no wolf ever had. She had raised a cougar, had seen him find a mate, had helped raise his cubs. She had created something new in the world, a blending of wolf wisdom and cougar strength that would live on in these cubs and their cubs after them. Little One seemed to understand what was happening. He groomed her face the way she had groomed his when he was small, his rough tongue gentle on her graying muzzle. The cubs, picking up on the somber mood, were quiet for once, pressed against her sides like little warm stones. As the sun set, painting the snow pink and gold, Luna managed to lift her head one last time. She looked at Little One, her impossible, beloved son, and saw in his eyes not a cougar or an enemy, but family. She looked at Shadow, who had overcome every instinct to accept this strange arrangement, and saw respect and something that might have been affection. She looked at the cubs, these miraculous creatures who would grow up knowing that the boundaries between species were not as fixed as the world believed, and felt hope. But Luna's story doesn't end with that sunset. Just as darkness began to fall, a sound echoed across the valley that made everyone freeze. A wolf howl, but not just any howl. This was young, uncertain, almost a question more than a statement. Through the trees, a shape emerged. A young wolf, barely more than a pup, thin and obviously alone. The young wolf stopped at the edge of their strange gathering, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. He was probably a disperser, kicked out his pack or fled from some disaster, drawn by the scent of wolf, but finding something unprecedented. Luna recognized herself in his hollow eyes, remembered her own desperate loneliness after losing her pack. Little One immediately moved to place himself between the wolf and his cubs, a low growl rumbling in his chest. But Luna, with effort that cost her nearly everything, made a soft whining sound she hadn't made in over a year. It was an invitation, a welcome, the same sound she had made for Little One so long ago. The young wolf took a hesitant step forward, then another. Shadow hissed, but didn't attack. The cubs, curious as all young things are, actually moved toward this new creature that smelled like their grandmother, but looked nothing like their parents. The male cub, bolder now than his sister, approached close enough to touch noses with the young wolf. In that moment, Luna saw the future. Not just one impossible pairing, but the potential for something entirely new. A world where the lost and lonely could find family in the most unexpected places, where the laws of nature could bend to accommodate love that transcended species. She saw Little One teaching this young wolf to hunt with them, saw the cubs growing up with a wolf uncle, saw Shadow accepting this growing strange family. With the last of her strength, Luna reached out and touched the young wolf's paw with her nose, then Little One's, a blessing and a passing of responsibility. Little One understood. He moved closer to the young wolf, not aggressively but curiously. He had learned from the best teacher that enemy and family were choices, not destinies. Luna's breathing slowed as she watched the beginning of this new impossible thing. The young wolf, overwhelmed but desperate for connection, lay down near her. Little One resumed his position pressed against her side. Shadow brought the cubs back, and they all lay together, wolf and cougar, predator and predator, reimagining what family could mean. As the stars emerged in the clear winter sky, Luna felt a deep peace settle over her. She had been the bridge, the impossible mother who had shown that love was stronger than instinct, that family was about choice, not blood. Her legacy would live on not just in Little One, but in this expanding circle of misfits who had found each other against all odds. Her last coherent thought was a memory of that first night, Little One pressed against her belly, both of them broken and alone. Now he was strong and whole, surrounded by his own family, capable of extending the same impossible mercy she had shown him. The circle was complete, but also just beginning. Luna's breathing grew shallower, but she wasn't struggling anymore. She was surrounded by warmth, by family, by the strange, wonderful things she had created in the world. The young wolf pressed closer, as if he understood he was witnessing something sacred. The cubs had fallen asleep, their small bodies rising and falling with peaceful breaths. Shadow had stopped hissing, accepting this moment for what it was. Little One began to purr, that strange sound she had come to love more than any wolf howl. It vibrated through her entire body, a sensation of comfort and belonging. She had taught him to hunt, to survive, to trust. But he had taught her something far more valuable. That love didn't recognize the boundaries that nature drew. That mother was a verb not limited by species. As the moon rose over the mountains, full and bright, Luna took her last breath. It was quiet, peaceful, just a gentle exhale that didn't draw back in. Little One knew immediately, his purr stopping, replaced by a sound Luna had never heard him make before. It wasn't a cougar scream or a wolf howl, but something in between, a mournful cry that spoke of loss in a language that transcended species. The young wolf joined in, his howl mixing with Little One's cry, creating a harmony that had never existed in nature before. Even Shadow added her voice, a long, low call that echoed off the canyon walls. The cubs woke and, not understanding but sensing the importance, added their small voices to the chorus. For miles around, predators and prey alike stopped to listen to this impossible sound, this grief song sung by natural enemies united in loss. It was wrong by every law of nature, and it was the most beautiful sound the forest had ever heard. They stayed with Luna's body through the night, keeping her warm even though she could no longer feel it. When dawn came, little one did something wolves do, but cougars don't. He began to dig. The ground was frozen, his paws weren't meant for digging, but he persisted. The young wolf joined him, his paws better suited for the task. Even Shadow helped, scraping at the earth with her powerful claws. They buried Luna at the base of an ancient pine, not far from where she had found little one that first night. The cubs brought small stones to place on the grave, their contribution to this ritual they didn't understand but knew was important. The young wolf, in a gesture that seemed to surprise even him, brought a rabbit he had caught and placed it on the freshly turned earth, an offering to the wolf which shown him he might not have to be alone. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. The young wolf didn't leave. Little one didn't drive him away. Shadow accepted his presence. They began to hunt together, wolf and cougars, combining their techniques in ways that would have been impossible to imagine before Luna had shown them the way. The young wolf, whom the cubs started following around like he was the most interesting thing in the world, began teaching them to howl. It was a poor attempt. Cougar throats weren't made for howling, but the intention was clear. Little one watched these lessons with what could only be described as amusement, remembering perhaps his own failed attempts to please Luna with sound his throat couldn't quite make. Winter deepened, but they thrived. The young wolf's endurance, combined with the cougar's power, made them formidable hunters. The cubs grew strong and strange, playing games that were neither fully wolf nor fully cougar. They stalked like cats, but hunted cooperatively like wolves. They climbed trees, but also dug dens. When spring came again, bringing new life to the forest, the cubs were nearly grown. The female, Brave, had developed an especially close bond with the young wolf, often choosing to hunt with him rather than her parents. Her brother, more traditional in his ways but still accepting of their strange family, began showing signs of wanting to establish his own territory. It was then that they encountered another impossible thing. A female cougar, young and injured, limping through their territory. But following her, keeping pace despite its own exhaustion, was a wolf pup. The story was written in their scents and wounds. Some disaster had befallen both their families, and somehow, in the chaos, they had found each other. Little one and the young wolf approached them carefully. The injured female immediately went defensive, placing herself between them and the wolf pup, just as Luna had once stood between little one and danger. But Brave, Luna's spiritual heir, if not her biological one, did something extraordinary. She lay down, just as Luna had once lain down for Shadow, and began to purr. The injured female's confusion was obvious, but the wolf pup, too young to know this was impossible, toddled forward and pressed against Brave's warm fur. The female cougar, seeing her adopted pup accepted, finally allowed her guard to drop. They brought the pair back to their territory, to the place by the ancient pine where Luna was buried. The injured female, whom they came to call Hope, healed slowly under their care. The wolf pup, barely old enough to be away from milk, was fed by all of them, passed from one to another like a communal treasure. As summer reached its peak, their strange family had grown to include 7 members, soon to be more as Shadow was pregnant again. They had claimed a territory that was respected by both wolves and cougars, not because they were strong, though they were, but because they were something unprecedented, something that didn't fit into the normal rules of territorial dispute. Other animals began to tell stories about them. Ravens, those gossips of the forest, carried tales of the wolf cougars, the impossible pack that hunted like both and neither. Some stories painted them as monsters, abominations that should not exist. Others painted them as miracles, proof that the old ways were not the only ways. The young wolf, now not so young, had taken on Luna's role as teacher to the new wolf pup. He showed him how to howl, but also how to understand the purring language of their cougar family. Hope, recovered from her injuries, proved to be an excellent hunter, and she and Shadow developed an unexpected friendship, often grooming each other's cubs. Little One had grown into his role as the bridge between worlds, the living proof of Luna's legacy. He could never fully be Cougar again, carried too much wolf in his heart, in his behaviors. But he had become something more than either species, a creature of two worlds who belonged fully to neither, but had created his own world where both could exist. On quiet nights, when the moon was full, he would go to Luna's grave and lie there, purring the story of their strange family to her memory. Sometimes the others would join him, creating that impossible harmony of purr and howl that had marked her passing. In those moments, it felt like she was still there, her spirit living on in this beautiful, impossible thing she had created. The cubs from Shadow's second litter were born knowing nothing but this mixed family. To them, it was normal for wolves and cougars to live together, to hunt together, to love each other. They grew up playing with the wolf pup, learning to howl from their wolf uncle, learning to climb from their cougar parents. They were the first generation to never know the world as it had been before Luna's choice. As autumn painted the leaves gold and crimson, a new challenge emerged. A proper wolf pack moved into the neighboring valley, and their scouts had surely scented the strange mixture of wolf and cougar in this territory. Little One and the others prepared for conflict, for the inevitable confrontation when the pack discovered their abomination. The pack's alpha pair came on a crisp morning when frost covered the ground. They were strong, healthy wolves in their prime, and they brought two subordinates with them. The meeting took place in a meadow halfway between the territories, neutral ground where blood hadn't been spilled before. The alpha male's reaction was immediate disgust when he saw Little One and Shadow together, saw the cubs that smelled of both species, saw the young wolf standing with cougars as if he belonged there. The alpha female, however, tilted her head with something more like curiosity than revulsion. What happened next would become legend among the forest creatures. Brave, now fully grown and magnificent, walked forward alone. She moved like a cougar, but held herself like a wolf, and when she was close enough to the alpha pair, she did something no cougar had ever done. She howled. It was imperfect, strained, not quite right, but it was unmistakably an attempt at wolf language by a cougar throat. The alpha female stepped forward, away from her mate's protective stance. She sniffed Brave carefully, taking in her mixed scent, her strange way of standing, the wolf behaviors written into her cougar body. And then, in a gesture that shocked everyone present, the alpha female play bowed, the universal canine invitation to friendship. Brave, who had learned this gesture from her wolf uncle, immediately bowed back, and for a moment, wolf and cougar played in that meadow like pups, chasing and tumbling while both groups watched in stunned silence. When they finally stopped, panting and somehow looking like they were grinning, the tension had broken. The alpha male was still suspicious, but his mate's acceptance carried weight. Through body language and careful interaction, a treaty of sorts was established. The territories would remain separate but respected. No aggression would come from either side. And most remarkably, the young of both groups would be allowed to meet at the meadow to play and learn from each other. It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it was a beginning. The wolf pack returned to their valley with a story none of their kind would believe. Little One and his family returned to their den, knowing that Luna's dream of a world with more flexible boundaries had taken another small step toward reality. Winter came harsh and early that year, but the mixed family was prepared. They had learned to cache food like wolves, but in the high places that cougars preferred. They hunted in groups when the snow was deep, using the wolves' endurance and the cougars' power in combination. The youngest cubs and the wolf pups stayed warm in a communal den that broke every rule about solitary cougars and pack wolves. On the coldest night of winter, when the aurora danced green and gold across the sky, Shadow gave birth to her third litter. There was only one cub this time, a female, but she was large and strong. When Little One brought her out to meet the family, the wolf pup immediately claimed her as his special responsibility, curling around her protectively despite being barely more than a pup himself. They named her Luna. Not officially, of course. Cougars and wolves don't name their young the way humans do. But in the way she was regarded, in the stories told about her namesake, in the special attention given to her upbringing, she was Luna reborn. She would grow up never knowing that wolves and cougars were supposed to be enemies, never questioning that family could mean any combination of beings who chose to love each other. The original Luna had been right about one thing above all. Love was stronger than instinct. It could override generations of genetic programming, could create bonds where only enmity had existed before. It could make a wolf mother to a cougar brother to a wolf, and from that impossible beginning, spawn a whole new way of being in the world. As spring returned once more, bringing with it the promise of new life, the forest had changed. Not obviously, not dramatically, but in small, important ways. A young disperser wolf, finding himself alone and afraid, might catch the scent of the mixed family and know that there was a place where different could be accepted. A orphaned cougar cub might be discovered not by death, but by an impossible rescue. The boundaries between predator and predator, between pack and solitary, between possible and impossible, had blurred just enough to allow for miracles. Little one, now a mature cougar of 3 years, stood on the same cliff where he had once stood as a yearling, looking out over the valley and fighting the call of his species to be solitary. But now he stood there with his family ranged around him. Shadow and their cubs, Brave and her brother, the young wolf who was no longer young, Hope and her adopted wolf pup, and little Luna riding on the wolf pup's back, because she could and no one had told her she couldn't. In the distance, he could hear the neighboring wolf pack howling their evening song. Without hesitation, the wolves and his family joined in. And then, in their strained, imperfect, but utterly sincere way, the cougars added their voices too. It was still wrong by every law of nature. It was still impossible. It was still the most beautiful sound in the forest. Somewhere, in whatever place the spirits of departed animals go, a gray wolf listened to that impossible chorus and knew that her choice on that snowy night had changed the world. Not the whole world, perhaps, but their small corner of it would never be the same. The ripples of her mercy would spread, generation by generation, until the forest itself would forget that there had ever been a time when love couldn't cross the boundaries between species. Little one had become the living bridge between worlds that Luna had dreamed he could be. He had taken her impossible love and multiplied it, creating a family that defied every natural law except the most important one, the law that said love would always find a way. And in the end, that was the only law that truly mattered. The story could end here, with this scene of impossible harmony. But life, even impossible life, continues. Little Luna grew fast and strange, playing games that were neither wolf nor cougar, but something entirely new. She stalked like her parents, but with a pack coordination learned from her wolf guardians. She howled better than any cougar before her throat seeming almost adapted for it, as if the impossible was becoming possible through sheer repetition. When she was 6 months old, something unprecedented happened. The neighboring wolf pack's alpha female arrived at their border, alone, carrying something in her jaws. It was a pup, but something was wrong with it. Its back legs didn't work properly, dragging uselessly behind it as it tried to crawl. In the harsh arithmetic of wolf pack survival, such a pup would normally be abandoned. But the alpha female had heard the impossible howls, had seen brave play in the meadow, had perhaps spent the winter thinking about the boundaries that seemed so fixed but perhaps weren't. She placed the pup at the border and looked directly at little one. The message was clear. If anyone could save this pup, if anyone would accept the imperfect and impossible, it was them. The pup, a male barely 8 weeks old, was integrated into their family without question. Hope, who had raised her wolf pup successfully, took primary responsibility for him. But it was little Luna who became his constant companion, somehow understanding that he needed her in a way the others didn't. She would lie beside him for hours, purring, and when he cried from frustration at not being able to keep up, she would groom him with a gentleness that seemed impossible in a creature designed to kill. They called him Miracle, and he lived up to his name. Unable to run like a wolf, he learned to climb like a cougar, his powerful front legs pulling him up trees where he would wait to drop on unsuspecting prey. He developed a hunting style all his own, part ambush predator, part persistence hunter. He couldn't chase, but he could wait with a patience that outdid even the Cougars. The wolf pack, seeing their abandoned pup not just surviving, but thriving, began to reconsider their own rigid rules. Other meetings happened at the meadow, tentative exchanges of knowledge. The wolves learned about patience and ambush. The mixed family learned about pack coordination and complex social hierarchies. Neither group fully adopted the other's ways, but the absolute wall between them developed doors, windows, places where light could pass through. 2 years passed. Brave found a mate, a young male cougar who was either brave or crazy enough to join their impossible family. He struggled at first with the presence of wolves, his instincts screaming at him to fight or flee. But Brave was patient, and little Luna was persistent, and eventually, he too learned to howl, badly but with enthusiasm. Hope's wolf pup, now fully grown, left to find his own way, but returned often, bringing stories of the outside world. He had found other impossibilities out there, a bear that had adopted orphaned fox kits, an eagle and a hawk that hunted cooperatively, the rigid laws of nature bending in small places, creating pockets of exception. Shadow, now old for a cougar mother, had her final litter. Just one cub again, a male this time, born during a thunderstorm that seemed to shake the mountains. He was different from the start, larger than normal, his spots arranged in patterns that almost looked like the markings of a wolf. When he opened his eyes, they were not the blue-gray of most cougar cubs, but a striking yellow, almost gold, like Luna's had been. They didn't name him, but everyone knew he was special. He learned to howl before he could properly walk, a sound that was neither wolf nor cougar, but somehow both. When a neighboring wolf pack heard him, they went silent, and their alpha pair came to the border to see this impossible thing for themselves. The male cub grew quickly, surpassing his siblings in size by the time he was 4 months old. But it was his behavior that was truly extraordinary. He naturally coordinated with others in hunts, something cougars never did. He could track by scent as well as any wolf, his nose seeming more sensitive than any cougar's should be. Most remarkably, he seemed to understand both species intuitively, translating between them without effort. Some of the wolves began to whisper that he was touched by spirits, that Luna's ghost had entered him somehow. The cougars thought he might be evolution in action, nature's answer to the new reality their families had created. Little one just saw his son, strange and perfect, the living embodiment of everything Luna had started. As the male cub grew, he began to range farther from home, always returning but bringing back stories of his adventures. He had met a lone wolf female who didn't flee from his cougar scent. He had encountered a male cougar who was curious about his wolf-like behaviors rather than hostile. He was building bridges everywhere he went, creating a network of impossible connections. When he was a year old, he did something that stunned everyone. He brought home a companion, but not a wolf or a cougar. It was a young lynx, orphaned and alone, drawn by the strange howling she had heard. The family, already impossible, simply expanded to include her. She learned their hybrid language, adding her own voice to their evening chorus, a sound that no forest had ever heard before. By the time little Luna was fully grown, the territory had become something unprecedented. It was a sanctuary for the impossible, a place where the ordinary rules of predator and prey, of species boundaries, of natural law, bent and flexed, and sometimes broke entirely. Young animals who didn't fit elsewhere found their way there, drawn by stories or scents, or just the deep need to belong somewhere. There was the golden eagle with the damaged wing who couldn't soar, but had learned to hunt on foot with the pack. The fox who had been raised by badgers and didn't know how to be properly solitary. The 3 wolf brothers who had been expelled from their pack for refusing to fight each other for dominance. Each impossible creature that arrived made the family larger, stranger, more wonderful. The neighboring wolf pack, which had initially been so suspicious, began sending their own misfits to the border. The runts, the different, the ones who didn't quite fit the rigid structure of pack life. Some stayed, some learned what they needed and returned, but all were changed by the experience. Other cougar territories began to know about them too. Young cougars would come to the edges of their land, curious about the stories of cougars who lived in groups, who raised their young communally, who hunted with wolves. Some were horrified and fled. Others lingered, wondering if there might be a different way to be. Miracle, the paralyzed wolf pup who had grown into a powerful hunter despite his disability, became a teacher to others with differences. He showed them that limitation in one area could become strength in another, that what seemed like weakness could be adapted into unexpected power. His patience, developed from necessity, made him one of the most successful hunters in the family. The lynx, whom they called Whisper for her quiet voice, proved to have a gift for finding herbs that could help with injuries and illness. She had learned from her mother before losing her, and now she taught the others. Soon, their territory was known as a place where injured animals might find not just acceptance, but healing. Little One was now 5 years old, middle-aged for a wild cougar. He spent more time at Luna's grave, lying by the ancient pine, telling her spirit about the impossible world that had grown from her one act of mercy. Sometimes the whole family would gather there, especially on the anniversary of her death, creating their chorus of impossible harmony. It was on one such anniversary that the earthquake struck. The ground shook with a violence that sent trees toppling and rocks sliding down the mountainside. The family scattered in panic, each seeking safety, their carefully built world seeming to crumble around them. When the shaking stopped, they gathered to count their members. Hope was injured, her leg trapped under a fallen log. Miracle was missing, last seen near the cliff that had partially collapsed. 2 of the youngest cubs were unaccounted for. The territory they had carefully marked and maintained for years was devastated, many of their cached food stores buried or destroyed. But then something remarkable happened. The neighboring wolf pack arrived at the border, not to take advantage of their weakness, but to help. They had sent scouts to check on the impossible family they had come to respect, if not fully understand. Together, wolves and cougars and all the others worked to free Hope, their combined strength accomplishing what neither could alone. Miracle was found by the eagle, who spotted him from a tree, trapped in a crevice but alive. The cubs were located by Whisper, who used her lynx climbing skills to reach them on a ledge no wolf or cougar could access. Every species contributed their unique abilities to the rescue effort. The wolf pack's alpha female made an unprecedented offer. Until their territory recovered, the impossible family could share the wolf pack's hunting grounds. It would be crowded, it would be difficult, but it was an acknowledgement that they were, in their strange way, kin. For a full season, wolf pack and impossible family shared territory. There were tensions, certainly. Some of the pack wolves couldn't adjust to cougars in their space. Some of the cougars felt constrained by pack hierarchy. But they made it work, and in doing so, created new connections that would outlast the emergency. Young wolves and young cougars played together for the first time, learning each other's games. Hunting parties mixed species, discovering new techniques. Evening howls included purrs and lynx cries, and even the eagle's screech, creating a symphony that drew curious animals for miles around. When the impossible family finally returned to their recovering territory, they were different. They had learned to be part of something even larger, had proven that cooperation could extend beyond their small group. The wolf pack was different too, less rigid in their structures, more open to variation. That autumn, little Luna found a mate, but true to her heritage, it was no ordinary courtship. The male was a cougar, but one who had been watching their family for years, fascinated by their ways. He didn't just join her, he joined them all, learning to howl, to hunt cooperatively, to accept wolves as family. Their cubs, born the following spring, were third-generation impossible. They would never know a world where species boundaries were absolute, where family meant only blood relations, where different meant dangerous. They were born into a world that Luna had only dreamed of, where love had indeed proven stronger than instinct. As Little One aged, now 7 years and showing gray in his muzzle, he became more of an elder statesman than active hunter. Young animals, Both Cougar and Wolf would come to him for advice, for stories, for the wisdom of someone who had lived between worlds his entire life. He would tell them about Luna, about that first impossible night, about how one choice to show mercy had changed everything. The territory had become a pilgrimage site of sorts. Animals who had lost their families, who didn't fit their species mold, who were different in ways that made them outcasts, would arrive seeking the sanctuary they had heard existed. Not all stayed, but all were welcomed, fed, and given the chance to rest in a place where different was not just accepted but celebrated. One visitor was particularly noteworthy. An ancient wolf, scarred and worn, arrived at their border in the depths of winter. He was the male wolf Luna had driven away all those years ago, the one who had tried to make her choose between him and Little One. He was dying, his pack long gone, and he had traveled far to see what had become of the choice he couldn't understand. Little One met him at the border, and, for a long moment, predator stared at predator, the weight of history between them. Then Little One did what Luna would have done. He invited the old wolf in, shared their food, and showed him the impossible family that had grown from Luna's choice. The old wolf stayed for 3 days, watching cubs that were neither wolf nor cougar in behavior play together, seeing species cooperate that should have been enemies, witnessing the world that his rigid thinking could never have imagined. On his last night, he went to Luna's grave and howled, long and mournful, perhaps apologizing to her spirit for not understanding, perhaps simply acknowledging that she had been right. He died peacefully in his sleep, and they buried him not far from Luna, another bridge between worlds, another reminder that change was possible even in the most set ways. His death brought his surviving pack members, just 3 young wolves who had been searching for him. When they saw where and how he had died, surrounded by the impossible, they asked to stay. By Little One's 8th year, the territory had become something that had no name in the language of the forest. It wasn't a pack, wasn't a solitary territory, wasn't anything that had existed before. It was a community of the impossible, a place where evolution happened not through generations but through choices, through mercy, through love that transcended biology. Scientists, had they known about it, would have said it was impossible. The stress of interspecies living should have torn them apart. The competition for resources should have driven them to conflict. The inability to produce offspring between species should have made their bonds meaningless in evolutionary terms. But life, as Luna had discovered, didn't always follow the rules that science had observed. The bonds they formed were not about producing offspring, but about survival of a different kind. The survival of the lonely, the different, the rejected. The survival of kindness in a harsh world. The survival of the impossible dream that enemies could become family. Little Luna's cubs with her strange mate grew strong and even stranger than their parents. They had their grandfather's ability to bridge worlds, their grandmother's courage, and something entirely their own, a complete comfort with the impossible that made them natural ambassadors between species. One of them, a female with markings that looked almost like wolf patterning, began ranging farther than any of them had before. She returned with stories of other impossible families forming, inspired by the stories of theirs. A bear and wolves hunting together, eagles and ravens sharing territory, the rigid laws of nature developing exceptions, adaptations, evolutions that had nothing to do with genetics and everything to do with choice. Little One, now ancient for a wild cougar at 9 years, spent most of his time by Luna's grave. His body was failing as hers had, but his spirit remained strong. The family brought him food, groomed him, kept him warm through his last winter. He had become what Luna had been, the heart of something impossible, the living proof that love could override instinct. When spring came, bringing with it his 10th year, Little One knew his time was near. The family gathered, understanding without being told. Wolves and cougars, lynx and fox, eagle, and all the other impossibilities that had found their way to them, surrounded him with warmth and love. As he lay there, his breathing growing shallow, he thought he could feel Luna's presence, not just at her grave but somehow everywhere, in every impossible bond that had formed, in every boundary that had been crossed, in every moment of mercy that had chosen love over law. His last act was to call out, not a cougar's scream or an attempt at a wolf's howl, but the unique sound he had developed, that impossible harmony of both. The family answered him, each in their own voice, creating a chorus that had started with one wolf's mercy and had grown to encompass an entire community. Little one died as the sun set, painting the sky in impossible colors, surrounded by a family that shouldn't exist, in a world that Luna had made possible. They buried him beside her, the wolf mother and cougar son reunited in death as they had been in life. But the story didn't end with little one's death any more than it had ended with Luna's. Little Luna took up the mantle, becoming the new bridge between worlds. Her cubs grew and had cubs of their own, each generation more comfortable with the impossible, each pushing the boundaries a little further. The territory became a place of legend, stories spreading through the forests and mountains of the place where wolves and cougars lived as family, where any creature could find acceptance, where the laws of nature bent to accommodate love. Some came to see if it was real. Some came to challenge it. But most came because they needed it, needed to believe that there was a place where different didn't mean alone. Generations passed. The original witnesses to Luna's first mercy aged and died, but their descendants carried the story forward. The grave by the ancient pine became a shrine of sorts, a place where impossible families would come to pay respects to the wolf who had started it all. The neighboring wolf pack fully integrated with them over time, the boundaries between territories becoming meaningless as both groups shared space and resources. Other cougar territories began to experiment with cooperation rather than pure solitude. The ripples of Luna's choice spread ever outward, changing the forest in ways both small and profound. Sometimes, on nights when the moon was full and the air was clear, all the voices of the forest would join together in a chorus that celebrated the impossible. Wolves and cougars, lynx and fox, birds and beasts that should have been enemies sang together of a world where mercy was stronger than instinct, where family was chosen not born, where love was the only law that truly mattered. And in that chorus, if you listen carefully, you could still hear the echo of that first impossible night, when a lonely wolf chose to warm an enemy cub, and in doing so, changed the world. The impossible had become possible, the unnatural had become natural, and the forest itself had evolved not through competition and conflict, but through cooperation and compassion. This was Luna's legacy, not just the family she had created, but the idea she had planted, that the boundaries between species were not walls, but bridges waiting to be built. Every impossible friendship, every unlikely alliance, every moment of mercy between natural enemies was a continuation of her story, proof that one act of kindness could echo through generations, reshaping the world in ways both large and small. The forest would never be the same. And somewhere, in whatever place the spirits of departed animals dwelled, a gray wolf and her adopted cougar son rested together, watching their impossible dream become reality, one chosen family at a time.